The Arctic Shift, How Canada Outmaneuvered Trump in Greenland and Rewrote the Future of the North. It began with a bold declaration and a pointed rebuke this morning. Denmark's Prime Minister announced, "I want to praise the people of Greenland for their resilience." Her tone, calm but unmistakably firm, was aimed squarely at one man, Donald Trump. Once again, the former U.S. president had reignited his ambitions to acquire Greenland. "The world needs us to have Greenland," Trump told supporters, including Denmark. "Denmark has to let us have it." But Frederiksen was unmoved. "Dear President Trump," she said with unflinching clarity, "Greenland has been part of the Danish kingdom for 800 years. It is an integrated part of our country. It is not for sale. Let me put it in words you might understand, Mr. Trump." The sarcasm landed, but the geopolitics were deadly serious. What seemed like a replay of Trump's 2019 Greenland remarks had escalated into something far more complex, a full-blown Arctic power shift, with Canada emerging as the unexpected victor. The new scramble for the Arctic in March 2025. Trump, then the Republican frontrunner for the presidency, used a high-profile speech before Congress to reignite his dream of acquiring Greenland, framing the territory as essential to U.S. national security and economic independence. He cited its massive reserves of rare earth minerals, untapped oil, and geostrategic location between North America and Europe. Miller, his administration, now heavily staffed with hawkish nationalists, began revisiting Cold War-era documents proposing long-term leases, economic annexation, and even outright purchase. Publicly, Trump declared that Greenland couldn't defend itself and needed U.S. stewardship. Vice President J.D. Vance echoed this message during a controversial visit to Nuuk, claiming that America had a moral and strategic duty to protect Greenland. "Obviously, we respect Denmark's sovereignty," he said, "but we're an Arctic nation too. The region's future cannot be left to chance." Yet even as the Trump camp turned up the heat, it was Canada that turned the tide. Quiet power. Canada's diplomatic ambush. While the U.S. wielded rhetoric, Canada wielded strategy. In a series of deft moves, largely unnoticed by mainstream media at the time, Ottawa stepped into the Greenland vacuum, not with threats, but with deals. To Canadian mining firms, Greenland Resources Incorporated and Amaroq Minerals, a $3 billion investment package to develop rare earth and gold operations across Greenland. The deals were backed by European investment funds and underwritten by Denmark's own export credit agency. Crucially, they aligned with the EU's critical raw materials strategy, giving them added legitimacy and urgency. But more important than the money was the manner of the agreement. Greenland's parliament had recently passed a sweeping infrastructure law in July 2025, requiring that all foreign mining projects maintain at least 70% local employment and dedicate 10% of profits to a national future fund. American firms balked at the terms, citing compliance challenges and diminished margins. Canadian firms embraced them without hesitation. That decision, respecting Greenland's right to dictate its own economic terms, earned Canada the trust that Trump could not buy. Building a new Arctic order. Canada's Arctic gambit didn't end with mining. In partnership with the European Development Bank and Norway's Sovereign Wealth Fund, Canada launched the Arctic Green Transition Fund, another $3 billion initiative designed to finance sustainable infrastructure and green energy projects across Greenland. The fund deliberately excluded us institutions, a quiet but symbolic rejection of Washington's erratic behavior in the Arctic. France joined soon after, deploying a nuclear submarine to Baffin Bay and helping finance Greenland's airport modernization through public investment banks. Within months, multiple NATO members were financially and militarily committed to Greenland's sovereignty. The U.S. vision of unilateral influence had not just failed, it had been outflanked. The strategic cost to Washington. For Washington, the consequences have been severe. Greenland's molybdenum output, crucial to steel alloys and nuclear energy, earmarked under the Inflation Reduction Act as a critical mineral for domestic sourcing. But now, with Canada controlling Greenlandic supply routes to Europe, American companies such as Lockheed Martin and Raytheon face delays in weapons systems and supply chain bottlenecks. Congressional dissent is mounting. Lawmakers from both parties warn that Trump's aggressive Arctic ambitions risk alienating allies, destabilizing an ecologically fragile region, and ultimately handing over influence to middle powers like Canada and institutions like the EU. Replacement of Biden-era Arctic cooperation frameworks with unilateral brinkmanship has left the U.S. on the outside looking in. Greenland ascends sovereignty through development. What makes this moment historic is not just who gained influence in Greenland, but how. By accepting local conditions and prioritizing long-term sustainability, Canada enabled Greenland to retain control over its resources, economy, and future. Mining profits now fund social programs, environmental oversight, and education. Canadian engineers and Greenlandic Inuit environmental monitors work side by side. Far from becoming a client state, Greenland is strengthening its sovereignty through development. Regulatory institutions in Nuuk have expanded. New ministries, focused on labor standards, environmental law, and fiscal transparency have been formed. And Denmark, while maintaining its role in foreign affairs and defense, has given Greenland more space than ever to chart its own course. The symbolism is profound. Greenland, once viewed as territory to be bartered or annexed, is now a model of cooperative autonomy. The Arctic hexagon, Canada's vision, unfolds at the heart of this transformation is Canada's sweeping new Arctic strategy, known as the Arctic hexagon. This initiative links 6 critical nodes across the north: Greenland's rare earths, Baffin Island's iron ore, Ontario's battery metals, Quebec's hydroelectric infrastructure, Arctic LNG terminals in Nunavut, and digital monitoring from the Canadian Space Agency. The idea is simple: create an integrated supply and energy corridor from the Arctic to Europe and Asia, based on environmental responsibility, strategic infrastructure, and shared sovereignty. Canada has already launched joint satellite projects with NASA to monitor Arctic ice melt and track shipping patterns. Investments in Arctic LNG are positioning Canada as a stable exporter to Germany and Scandinavia, while green hydrogen and ammonia exports are being piloted with Japanese and Dutch firms. Science, climate, and indigenous power. But perhaps Canada's most powerful tool isn't economic or military, it's scientific and cultural. New Arctic research programs between Canadian and Nordic universities are exploring climate modeling, biodiversity tracking, and sustainable drilling technologies. The Canadian Coast Guard, in partnership with its Nordic allies, is training Greenlandic crews in navigation safety for emerging trade routes in the Northwest Passage and Northern Sea Route. Inuit communities are also shaping policy at the highest levels. Greenlandic and Canadian Inuit councils have formed joint task forces to guide mining development, land use, and educational exchanges. Traditional ecological knowledge is now part of environmental assessments and territorial planning. This culturally inclusive model, fusing indigenous wisdom with high-tech science, offers a stark contrast to the extractive, top-down approaches historically favored by great powers. Militarization, law, and the risk of escalation. Meanwhile, legal and military tensions are simmering beneath the surface. As a NATO member, Denmark could invoke Article 5 if U.S. actions in Greenland are deemed hostile. The Pentagon has reportedly explored conducting freedom of maneuver exercises at Thule Air Base, but both Nuuk and Copenhagen have resisted, fearing any military escalation could spark a Greenlandic independence movement. International legal scholars have also warned that a unilateral annexation attempt by the U.S. would violate norms of self-determination enshrined in the UN Charter and Arctic Council agreements. In short, Trump's Greenland gambit could backfire not only diplomatically but legally and militarily as well. A new Arctic future, forged in ice. Defined by diplomacy, the Arctic is no longer a frozen wasteland on the periphery of world affairs. As climate change opens new shipping lanes and unlocks critical minerals, the region is fast becoming a geopolitical frontier. But unlike the 20th century's Cold War rivalry, the 21st century Arctic will be shaped by different forces: science, diplomacy, energy, cooperation, and ecological stewardship. And in that arena, Canada has become a superpower in all but name. Its careful combination of soft power, indigenous inclusion, scientific leadership, and economic investment has redrawn the Arctic map without firing a shot. Greenland, once treated as a commodity, is now seen as a partner. Denmark, once alone in its defense of sovereignty, now stands at the heart of a robust European-Canadian alliance, and the United States, once the dominant Arctic force, has been left scrambling to redefine its role in a world that no longer responds to coercion. Conclusion: who defines the Arctic? As the geopolitical ice continues to crack and shift, the key question is no longer who owns the Arctic,